It's me, Damaris Brisco, here at Roy's Redwoods Open Space Preserve once again in Coast Miwok territory, and today I want to talk to you about this really cool mushroom. It's on this tree behind me. Let's take a look. So, this is the fruiting body of a fungus. I call it a mushroom, but it's not anything like most people think of as mushrooms. For one thing, it doesn't have any gills, and it doesn't have a stem or what we call a stipe. Instead, it forms a kind of shelf, and it's very hard. I mean, very hard. So, this organism is called a Western artist's conch. And their scientific name is Ganoderma brownie. Ganoderma, gano means shiny, and derma means skin. That is the genus name for this group of mushrooms. And this one doesn't look very shiny right now. That's partially because it's been very dry lately. If we pour a little bit of water on it over the top, there we go. Yeah. Oh, you can see how nice and shiny it looks in the rain. So this kind of fungus, it belongs to a group that's called the polypores. Now, polypores has to do with the spore-bearing surface, this white part here. And in order to see the pores, we're going to have to take a closer look. Hold on a minute. So this is the spore-bearing surface of this fungus, and you can see how it's made up of thousands of these teeny tiny little pores. That's why they're called a polypore. And this is where the spores come out. And here I've got a part of an artist's conch that fell off of a tree, and I broke it so that you can see that. So this would be the porous surface right here. On a fresh one, this surface would be all white, but this one is old and rotting. But here you can see how the pores are connected to, they're really just the end of these tubes, which is where the spores are formed. And then they are expelled out the pores at the bottom. And see here underneath the mushroom on the tree how it looks a little bit dusty. Kind of a reddish dust there. Those are the spores of this fungus. They are a reddish brown color, and they put out billions of them. I mean, just so many. It's actually a fairly common allergen. So I do my best to avoid breathing them in as much as possible. Let's take a look at the tree this is growing on. That can be an important indicator of what species you're looking at with a fungus. It's got that pale gray bark. It's very tall and lanky. Got a lot of moss growing on it. And down here, you can see a leaf. This is a California bay laurel tree, and it is the preferred host of this fungus. but I know it also grows in other trees like almonds. And in a live tree, it's considered a plant pathogen or a parasite because it does damage the tree. It causes something called butt rot, which is where the fungus eats away at the tree down here where the trunk meets the ground, and it can actually make the tree too weak to stand and they might fall over in high winds. But they also feed on dead trees, and in that case they're what we call a saprotroph. Sapro means decay and troph means eating. So a saprotroph is an organism that feeds on dead and decaying matter. This is also what we would refer to as a perennial mushroom because they do stick around year after year and add on growth. A conch like this can persist for 50 years or more. And they're really just so fascinating. Every one of these grows in its own weird way. Over the years, they add on sometimes extra shelves, and it can be really fascinating to watch them develop over the years, unless somebody comes along and knocks one off. And there are a few reasons people might do that. One of them is because mushrooms in this genus are purported to have some medicinal properties. So some people like to harvest them and make a medicinal tea or a tincture out of them. They're also sometimes harvested for art. And I will show you why people harvest them for art. The white spore-bearing surface here is actually pretty thin, and it can very easily be scraped away with a stick or some kind of a stylus. And I'm going to use an awl, actually, is what I've got with me today, to scrape a little design on here. There we go. Now, most people who do art with these mushrooms, of course, are way better at it than I am, and they're a lot easier to work with once they're off the tree. But as I said earlier, these mushrooms can persist and live on for 50 years or more, so keep that in mind. I prefer to leave them on the tree. If you want mushrooms for medicine, you can always buy ones that are cultivated and not take the ones away from the forest. Now, doing art like this, scraping a message or a design on a mushroom like this, isn't going to harm it in the long term. This one has had a lot of messages scraped into it over the years, and in a few months, that white porous surface will grow back over the part that's been scraped away, and you won't even be able to tell that it was there. Here we have another Western artist conch that's growing on a stick, coming out of the ground. And here you can really see those reddish spores that I was talking about earlier. Now, they don't always look like this. Most of the time when I'm out in the forest and I see these mushrooms, they don't have this enormous reddish brown spore print on everything around them. Most of the time when I see this kind of activity from them, it seems to come a week or two before we get a good rain event. Now, it's been really unseasonably dry here in California, Northern California, the past few months. We haven't had much rain to speak of at all since the new year. But we do have some in the forecast coming up soon. And I'm hoping that these little guys know what they're talking about, know what they're doing when they put out those spores, because we could all use a really good gully washer here. This right here is what the artist conch looks like when it's first forming. You can see that it doesn't have that dark shelf on top. It's just kind of a white blob. It looks a lot like a slime mold, but if you touch them, you can tell they're very hard. And of course, they also do the art thing. I don't know if you can tell, it's a smiley face. Further up here on this same log, you can see an older artist's conch here that somebody knocked off. Take a look at the inside of this one. This must have been growing here, I'd say at least 2 to 3 years, depending. It looks like it wasn't knocked off very long ago, because that white spore-bearing surface starts to turn dark here pretty quickly. But that's a new one, and a slightly older one. And this will continue to grow, but it's going to have to put more resources into replacing what's been lost there. And this is what they look like when they get a little older and start to form that shelf. You can see here, it's got the brownish top instead of being white all the way over. Now, the artist conch that grows here, this is actually the third time I've seen one grow in this exact spot, because somebody keeps coming along and taking the conch off, which is a real pity, because last rainy season there was a nice shelf here. It was a little shady, and there were snails that would take refuge underneath it from the sun during the day. And I was watching them for a while, and then one day I came by and the little conch was gone. But hopefully this time, it will be left in peace, and the snails can have their roof back. Now this is probably the biggest artist's conch that I've found here at Roy's Redwoods. Let's see, it's got multiple layers of shelving there, and it's added on over the decades that this has been here. And here up at the top, you can kind of see where it's been broken off there, because somebody harvested it, part of it. Which is a shame, really. It's amazing to see something like this. And it's sad when people take part of it or all of it away so that other people can appreciate it. You can also see how it's got some little mosses growing on top of it there. Yeah. A shelf fungus like this becomes a habitat in and of itself. I found all kinds of insects crawling around on them. Just yesterday, I found a pseudoscorpion that was hiding underneath one on the ground. And sometimes I find little piles of insect frass on top, poop, from something that has been living inside of the fungus. So these aren't just decorative, and they're not just there to make spores. A fungus like this plays many, many different roles in the forest. So this is the last artist conch that I wanted to show you today. It's on my favorite log, which has quite a bit of it here. I don't know if you can see down there. And then if we look, there's more down there. And then over there. You can see more further down there. Anyway, like I said, it's my favorite log, and this Ganoderma is a big reason why. It's helping to break the nutrients in the log down into stuff that other organisms can consume. And because there's so much of it here and it's such a big log, there's a lot of organisms that live around here, lots of different kinds of millipedes, and there are the beautiful reticulate tail dropper slugs, and probably most excitingly for me, all kinds of slime molds, like this one here. This is a very old sporangia, or the spore-bearing structures of hanging slime mold, also called Badhamia utricularis. And I watched that plasmodium, when it was in its feeding form, eat its way across this whole shelf of mushrooms before it finally had enough and fruited right there. And when the rains come again, we might see more. So that's the western artist conch. Very common in the Bay Area here in Northern California, on California bay laurel trees, and very, very common here at Roy's Redwoods. It's a very good fungus.